Hohenzollerns Castle in the Swabian Alps, ancestral home to one of Germany's oldest dynasties. A royal house once lived here whose history dates back 950 years. Even today, almost 100 princes and princesses belong to the Hohenzollern dynasty, which produced German rulers, kings, and Kaisers. In Berlin, the capital of their former kingdom Prussia, the Hohenzollerns have left notable new marks. Here, they determined the fate of the German Empire. Here, they dreamed of a world empire and plunged the nation into a century of disaster. In August 2011, Berlin's neighboring city Potsdam becomes the setting for an event which attracts attention throughout Germany. High-profile guests are invited. The press gets into position. German television networks even broadcast live. The occasion is the wedding of Prince George Friedrich of Prussia, the current head of the former royal family. We were a bit hesitant to have our wedding televised. The fact that Prussia is a polarizing topic is something I've known since I was a child. And just as I've met people who celebrate and honor my ancestors and all things Prussia, there are also people who take a very critical view of it. After all, it is the great-great-grandson of the last German Kaiser who is being celebrated here. Among the celebrities are representatives of German aristocratic families, prominent celebrities, and emissaries from European royal families. Politicians also want to bask in the nostalgic glory of the Prussian crown. And that in Potsdam. You know, you have to remember that it was still communist 20 years ago. In former East Germany, it was completely unthinkable that something like this could happen, that the presence of the House of Prussia could be brought back into consciousness, that it still exists and will continue to do so. And I was also moved to see how people were gathered in the streets. The bride is also from nobility, Princess Sophie from the House of Isenberg. But alongside the joy of the glitz and the glamour, there are also criticisms recalling Prussia's less glamorous legacies. Prussia is viewed with mixed feelings by historians and the general public. There are Prussian associations and Prussia enthusiasts, and there is equally fierce opposition. This all has a lot to do with Prussia's two-faced nature. Two faces for which the famous representatives of the House of Hohenzollern are responsible for. Frederick the Great, who made Prussia a great power. The price? 3 devastating wars costing hundreds of thousands of lives. Wilhelm I also went into battle. Prussia had France in its sights. At the expense of the French, the German Empire was born, with Wilhelm as Kaiser. His grandson strove for world domination. Unlike any other German monarch, Wilhelm II was defeated amidst trumpets and drums. At the end of the First World War, the nation rebelled and protested against the rulers for reforms and a republic, which failed after just 14 years, ending in the Nazi dictatorship. After losing the Second World War, more than 12 million people lost their homes. So too did the members of the House of Prussia. After 1945, with the family fleeing to the west and the collapse of the entire country, that was actually the downfall of the dynasty, so to speak, which was 950 years old and had been a power in Germany and in Prussia for 500 years. And so today, the family lives much like any other citizen, just with a completely different tradition and a completely different heritage.
Bloß mit einer natürlich ganz anderen Tradition. Und einem ganz anderen Erbe.
What was left of the Prussian palaces after the war now belongs to the state. Around 150 historic buildings and 800 acres of parkland are managed by the Prussian Palaces and Gardens Foundation. Only Hohenzollernen Castle in the Swabian Alps is still owned by the family. Today, Prince George Friedrich is responsible for the castle. From an early age, he has had to deal with the history of his ancestors. Are you a prince? Do you have a crown? Do you have a castle? These questions always gave me the feeling that somehow I wasn't quite normal, and actually as inconspicuous as possible. I am by definition a person of public interest. I can't deny that. I am the heir to my grandfather, my great-grandfather, the German Crown Prince, and lastly, my great-great-grandfather, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who everyone is familiar with. And so that's where this term, person of public interest, comes from. The castle in the Swabian Alps is the family's landmark. The history of the Hohenzollern dynasty began in the 11th century with the first appearance in records of the name Burchard von Zollen. At the beginning of the 13th century, the family split through the division of inheritance into the Royal House of Hohenzollern and the Royal House of Prussia, of which Prince George Friedrich is the current head of the family business. There have been no dynastic connections between the two lines for centuries. However, they still appear together as a family today. Hohenzollern Castle is a joint venture between our families, and that alone provides plenty of links between us. When we meet here regularly, we plan what will happen to the castle, what events we can plan here. A Hohenzollern prince has always been present at events throughout history, and this friendly partnership continues, also with the current prince, Karl Friedrich. Karl Friedrich is the head of the royal Hohenzollern family. His ancestors ruled over Sigmaringen in Swabia until 1849. Today, it is his job to keep the estate and the family together. I'm very lucky to have been born into a family like this. But of course, the responsibility is a lot to carry. There are responsibilities for people, for the upkeep of historic monuments, for the castle, for many things which a normal family doesn't have. The former rulers of the small principality still have a large fortune today. Sigmaringen Castle is home to the princes, maintained their court traditions here until the 1960s. They had a court which was run properly, so we no longer had an official court-martial. But there was a man who called himself head of the cabinet. My father still ran it very much like a monarchy. He had his own small cavalry. He had his court gunmen, and he had all his marvellous robes. He always wore them on big occasions. It was really quite something. It has been custom for centuries at Sigmaringen for the eldest son to be the sole heir. The other departing heirs receive an allowance. This is how the current prince and firstborn heir has grown up. You can't divide up the inheritance. It's made up of assets, not physical money. I can't say, okay, that will be split into 4 and then everyone gets a quarter. It wouldn't work. I could sell it, but then it would be gone. My father said to me, "So, are you ready for this way of life?" And when you say yes, it's understood that you therefore live in the expected way from then on. Prince Karl Friedrich also inherited 1/3 of the Hohenzollern castle from his father. The large remainder belongs to the Prussian line. But unlike the Prince of Hohenzollern, the Prince of Prussia was not able to rely on his father's advice. Very sadly, I did not know my father. He died when I was just over a year old. He was in the German army as an aspiring lieutenant in the reserves and had a very serious accident which left him very badly injured. It's a strange feeling to realize now that I'm older than my father ever was. I have to say that even after so many years, I still find myself in situations nowadays where I wish I could have gotten to know my father. If I knew I had a father I could go to for advice, it would have made things so much easier. That's certain. So, in that respect, I probably miss him even more now than I did then. Instead, advice comes from the young prince's grandfather, Louis Ferdinand, Prince of Prussia. The independence that this young chap has achieved is down to the fact that, firstly, he's got what it takes. So he's absolutely intellectually capable. And he has this wise, kind grandfather gently guiding him, without trying to be his father. Prince Louis Ferdinand grew up in the monarchy. In keeping with his status, in 1938 the grandson of the last Kaiser married a Grand Duchess from the Russian Tsarist family. In 1951, Louis Ferdinand became the head of the House of Prussia. He had no criticisms about the Federal Republic, but merely said that should the people want there to be another Kaiser, then he was ready. However, he remained a ruler only amongst his own family.
Uncle Lulu was always very kind and friendly. At the castle there were events and parties and sometimes sadly funerals. And you would see him there and he was actually very approachable. He was very musical, very talented, and gave wonderful concerts and composed music.
And occasionally held court, just like in the good old days. If he was addressed as His Royal Highness, then it was absolutely self-evident, no one doubted it. It didn't seem strange. His demeanor alone made him so. But on the other hand, he was still the typical grandfather to me. But the grandfather had a little problem. There were two skeletons in the closet, or rather corpses in the cellar. Until 1991, the coffins of the two Prussian kings were stored at Hohenzollernen Castle. Shortly before the end of the Second World War, the remains of Friedrich Wilhelm I and Frederick the Great had been transported to the West. Restoration of their coffins brought certainty about the condition of his two ancestors. My brother acted as the family's witness, as none of the Prussians were able to. He saw the remains of Frederick the Great's body. His uniform still had that Prussian blue color, but otherwise he said that he was, as we know about the king already, very small with his very prominent nose and this crooked mouth, which was so lopsided because of the stroke he had had. There also is his death mask too, which you could use to orientate yourself. So it was deeply shocking to think, right, this really is a historical figure. Frederick the Great, they are long dead, but it still gives you the shivers. In August 1991, these two legendary Prussian ancestors set out on their final journey. They were escorted by the German army, which resulted in public criticism, and travelled by private train to Potsdam, made possible by the recent reunification. But the reburial of the Prussian coffins was controversial. A few weeks after the decision to reinstate Berlin as the German capital again was made, this repatriation in the presence of Chancellor Helmut Kohl led to fears of a resurgence of German grandeur. I can still remember us travelling behind the coffins as a family in cars and buses, and people really came right up to the window. And of course, there were some masked demonstrators there among them too. And I can still remember there was this picture of Frederick the Great with a skeleton head being carried around. It got quite loud and there was something a bit sinister about it all. This was not how Frederick the Great had imagined his funeral. He wanted to be buried without pomp, splendour and ceremony. The glory of the old monarchy still shines today. Even after 3 centuries, the fascination with Prussian kings seems unbroken. Today, the former king's tomb has become a tourist attraction. He was a genius in many ways, but genius is dangerous in a monarch. And he had too much of it, as other Prussian monarchs have also had too much genius too. They end up becoming victims of their talent. From 1415, the Hohenzollern family were the rulers of Brandenburg. The rise of the house began in the 17th century with the great elector, Frederick Wilhelm of Prussia. His son, Frederick, was crowned the first king of Prussia in 1701. Frederick Wilhelm I came to power in 1713. His formidable army earned him the nickname, the Soldier King. He was called the Soldier King, but he never went to war. He knew simply that an army was advantageous for strengthening diplomacy, to give him power and, if necessary, to defend the country. They were warlike times completely. It was the time period of the War of the Spanish Succession, and this sentiment travelled throughout all of Europe, with Austria and England on one side and France and Spain on the other. It shaped the modern world, and this less wealthy Prussia, ruled by the Soldier King, had the enormous advantage of staying out of it. The army could consume up to 80% of a state's revenue. In this regard, the Soldier King made great savings. Ceremonial buildings were converted, such as the magnificent artillery arsenal building in Berlin, at great expense to his subjects. His reforms did not stop with the nobility either. This was his approach to governing, maintaining the economy, and running a stable state with full coffers. He had written a political will for his beloved son, but not so loved successor Frederick, to lay down rules of political governance that are still valid today. It starts with money. That good money should be managed well, and says not to throw the economy off balance by investing in Eurobonds or something else, for example. He advises frugality in bookkeeping, auditing, civil councils. You didn't have to be from aristocracy to climb the administrative ladder. You had to be able to achieve something. The Soldier King put an end to the feudal rule. But of course, like any absolute ruler, he was also a bit psychopathic. Power didn't just bring out a rare best in him, but it also brought out the worst, as is usually the case for people. In other words, megalomania. His spiritual son, Frederick, later the Great, suffered most from his father's megalomania. The Soldier King wanted to drive out his son's artistic and philosophical fantasies. He brutally punished the heir when he tried to flee from his father's tyranny. The king had Hans Hermann von Katt, the friend who had helped his son try to escape, executed before Frederick's eyes. The fact that Frederick the Great became such a hard-hearted person must certainly be his father's fault. He was so brutal, battering and beating his son, and really destroying this poor boy's very tender soul. Relief came in 1740 with the death of his father. The king's oppressed heir transformed himself into a cool, calculating general. He took advantage of his father's army. He took on the powerful Habsburgs and invaded the Austrian province of Silesia. After 3 long wars over more than 20 years, it was finally conquered successfully. There were not only the immediate acts of war, but there were also the accompanying deep depression in the country, with the destitution and poverty. That didn't really bother him much. The conquest of Silesia was the crucial step in Brandenburg Prussia's rise to European power for the poor, sandy, pine-covered Prussia. There was hope connected with having a rich province, and Silesia was a rich province. He set out wanting to have a seat at the table of the greats. That is what he did. His military success earned him his title, Frederick the Great. He was all anyone could talk about, wrote Wolfgang von Goethe, but many people were not fond of Frederick. To this day, he remains a controversial figure. He is not seen as a perfect political beacon. The question still remains, what does historical greatness mean? It doesn't mean that he was a particularly good person, but rather that he had a huge impact, And in that sense, Frederick the Great was certainly great. He promoted science, economics, education, justice, and culture. But the ruler, who had a great appreciation for beauty, led a secluded life. On the outskirts of Potsdam, he built his summer residence, Sanssouci Palace. The designs for the now World Heritage Site come from his own hand. Frederick wrote, Frederick philosophized, Frederick composed, and even played concert flute. His music talent seems to run in the Hohenzollern genes. Music certainly runs in Charlie's blood. Behind the pseudonym lies Karl Friedrich, Prince of Hohenzollern and band leader of Charlie and the Jive Mates. Now, soundcheck at the Prinzregenten Theatre in Munich for a charity concert, where the Prince of Schaumburg-Lippe also is taken to the stage. I grew up around music, and it is a wonderful equalizing hobby, because somehow you're someone else when you play, especially when you're on stage. Lights down, spotlight on for Charlie and the Jive Mates. Even the Munich audience can slowly get grooving. His biggest fan sits in the front row. His wife, Katharina, never misses a performance.
He isn't some strange prince. He has no arrogance. And he's a great musician. He doesn't just play the saxophone. He sings, he composes, and also plays the guitar really well. So a total pro. I think he's cool. Yeah, I just think he's cool. A cool guy.
The couple have been married for 2 years. This is the prince's second marriage. Prince Karl Friedrich has enthusiastically devoted himself to his estate of castles, forests and industry. The family's empire's centerpiece is the Zollern steel manufacturers, one of the oldest companies in Germany, half of which the prince can call his own. The iron processing plant began operations more than 300 years ago. Zollern is still active in the metal industry today and is one of the largest employers in the region, with more than 1,700 employees. People are proud of the prince who lives here in Sigmaringen and is recognized as one of us. Locals see this company as a sort of anchor point in quite a turbulent world and want to be part of it. It's a company which has survived 302 years, has shown its stability and that it can withstand storms. Stormy times did indeed occur in the 1970s. Steel crisis and mismanagement. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. More than 1,000 jobs were at stake. My father said at the time they couldn't expect these employees to deal with this. These families who have already worked for the company for many generations and who also had identity here. So, they sold a lot of real estate, forestry areas, investments and other things to help allow the company to continue. Today, the company is in better shape than ever. The new princess holds the responsibility for marketing Sigmaringen Castle. Princess Katharina organizes exhibitions and has devoted herself to public relations. She comes from the Hamburg advertising industry. Many things have changed. That is in itself very refreshing, sometimes a little unusual, especially for those more relaxed Swabians, when someone from northern Germany suddenly comes along and says that we're not going to waste time, we're going to do it in this way or like that. 125 people are employed at the castle to take care of administration, the armory and the archives. The so-called castle ghosts also include caretakers, restorers and museum guides.
The castle ghosts are brilliant, and there is one whose parents worked here in the castle too who knows everything, so without him I would be lost. I have to ask often, where is this? Where is that? He says, yes, Your Highness, it's over here or over there. I'll collect it for you, because trying to find your way around here really takes time. I even just got lost again just now.
Sigmaringen Castle has more than 450 rooms, which have been home to the princes of Hohenzollern for centuries.
It all begins in 1061. That's almost incomprehensible to us. And they all look the same. These funny, strange-looking guys with long noses and funny, pointy shoes.
On the occasion of the 950th anniversary of the house in the summer of 2011, the Prince and Princess invited family and friends. Portuguese gallery of the castle houses all the big names. A feast based on historical recipes is on the menu. It's being prepared just as it was more than 100 years ago. The menu dates from the year 1884. Back then, a golden wedding anniversary was being celebrated for the last reigning and most important prince in Sigmaringen. Karl Anton von Hohenzollern, who turned out to have a golden touch when it came to improving his family tree. In the middle of the 19th century, he placed his children in influential courts in Europe. The eldest daughter became Queen of Portugal through marriage. A son was sent to Romania in 1886, where he was offered the title of King 15 years later. Another daughter married into the Belgian royal family. Little Sigmaringen even played a key role in the future of Europe in 1870. Karl Anton's son Leopold was offered the vacant throne of Spain. At that time, Prince Leopold was practically persuaded. It wasn't what our house wanted at all. It was a suggestion which became public indiscreetly. France felt snubbed. France feared being cornered from both sides by the German rulers, on one side by the royal Swabian dynasty in the south and by the Prussian monarchs to the north. Wilhelm I had sat on the throne there since 1858. However, he left governmental affairs to his ambitious Prime Minister, Otto von Bismarck. The cooperation between the monarch and his Prime Minister always followed the same pattern. Bismarck made the decisions, and Wilhelm I also obeyed when it came to the question of the Swabian prince's candidature for the Spanish throne. As he recorded in a letter on the 21st of June 1870, he only gave his approval unwillingly because he feared diplomatic consequences. And indeed, 3 weeks later, a French ambassador asked Wilhelm to withdraw the candidature of the Swabian prince. Wilhelm I then reluctantly told him that they would not pursue this any further, that it was pointless, and that no argument on the matter was needed. In a confidential note in the Ems dispatch, he informed the Prime Minister of the meeting. Bismarck stabbed his king in the back. He turned the confidential note into an incisive press release with the sole aim of provoking France. It sounded as if the ambassador had been sent away coldly and the king, so to speak, should represent the honor of Prussia and Germany. That was a bad thing. Provoked France to declare war. Bismarck had achieved his goal. In July 1870, France went to war against the Prussian forces. German princes, from the Danish border in the north to Bavaria in the south, united in solidarity with the Prussian king. It was the birth of the German nation-state. On January the 18th, 1871, Wilhelm I became the first of his allies to be proclaimed German Kaiser in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The unfortunate proclamation of the Kaiser in Versailles, in the Hall of Mirrors, the French's holy sanctum, this disgrace in their sacred Versailles was not very wise. It is something which France did not forget until the First World War. The German Empire brought peace to Germany with an economic upswing and social reforms, such as the introduction of a social security system, helping to bring the ruling family to great popularity. Wilhelm I's grandson came to power in 1888. Wilhelm II wanted to lead the Germans towards glorious days, as he proclaimed at the beginning of his reign. And he wanted, of course, to make Germany a great world power through the military. And Germany was, yes, a military state, so it did encroach on all areas of cultural life. And that didn't suit everyone. But if you weren't in the military as a man, then you didn't have a career. His militarism, his claim to imperial power, and his preference for grand entrances was not appreciated by all Germans.
It's true that the Kaiser wasn't particularly popular. This addiction to greatness and always having to prove yourself, wanting to prove yourself, and his addiction to power and also his appearance, like with his uniforms and everything, is all actually a sign of a deep insecurity.
He tried to downplay this insecurity and lack of assertiveness, but this staging had little grounding in consistent and systematic political realism. His ruling style became too unpredictable for many of the political leadership elites. He was a man who was very difficult to control, even for himself, with no one able to control him. His court advisors tried again and again, but this also didn't really work. Wilhelm was in favor of armaments, especially at sea. "Our future lies on the water," was his credo. He wanted to impress the world with a mighty naval fleet. He was fascinated, like most Germans at the time, by technology, and especially naval technology. He wanted to be the German Navy Kaiser, just like the former soldier king. His imperial quest for great power particularly provoked England's naval power. At the beginning of the 20th century, the German Empire had almost no allies left, with only Austria still at its side. The Austrian heir to the throne was murdered in Serbia. A foreign policy crisis broke out in Europe. In Berlin, the situation came to a head. Wilhelm supported Austria without reservation. His generals supported him. In an emergency, they could take on the whole of Europe. So there was a huge accident waiting to happen here at the central crossroads of Europe, and Wilhelm II was one of the factors. There was no serious imperial government capable of overruling the army, and that was a big mistake, as all of the strands of foreign and security policy converged on him. He was the only one who had and had to have an overview of it all. But he lost his overview. The Germans marched to their defeat in 1914 with jubilant patriotism. The Hellstorm, which has gone down in history as the primary catastrophe of the 20th century, lasted 4 years. Wilhelm II is despised by the world as a warmonger, but he was also a puppet of his generals. It was as if he had an enormous toy which he completely underestimated in its dynamics, in its self-destructive power. He did not take his responsibility as a leader seriously. That is his lasting, if you like, historical guilt. The loss of First World War plunged the nation into a deep depression. Wilhelm fled into exile to Doorn in the Netherlands. the Germans wanted nothing more to do with him. That irritated him, because Wilhelm was never aware of his own guilt. In principle, life in Dorn was a miniature of Potsdam court society, because the Kaiser still felt like the Kaiser, even though he no longer was one. But the days were very strictly organized. Each day there was a morning service held by the Kaiser himself, then a lecture, and then he worked. Then he went into his garden. He had a big park there. Wilhelm was informed about the situation in the Empire. While the situation in the new republic neared the brink of collapse, he lived safely in exile. He lived in a parallel world, spent time gardening, and dreamed of a grand return. His daughter-in-law, Cecile, is said to have said that she thought Wilhelm didn't even realize that he would never be on the throne again, that no one would ever call again. Hermine, his second wife, was a very ambitious person and someone who had contact with the early Nazi party. When Göring visited the house in Dorn twice in 1931 and 1932, and Hermine longed to sit on the Hohenzollern throne. She also travelled to Germany, which the Kaiser couldn't do, and attend a Nazi party meeting, already making contacts. With the help from the emerging National Socialists, the former Kaiser hoped to return to the throne. Hitler had indeed pinned his hopes on this. One of the Kaiser's sons, Prince August Wilhelm, even joined the Nazi party and became a high-ranking SA official. Of course, this was just a game for Hitler. He needed to have some good connections, and he knew that he would also need competent bureaucrats. He would need the mediation of senior military officials. In short, he deceived them all, including, of course, the Hohenzollern family. Their lack of recognition shows great naivety. The House of Hohenzollern has shared much of his naivety with a good portion of German conservatives, especially the nobility. After taking power in 1933, Hitler quickly dropped the Hohenzollern family. 6 years later, bombs shook Europe for a second time. Hitler invaded Poland. Then he also invaded France, at which point the Kaiser expressed his congratulations. Deeply struck by France's weapon development, I congratulate you and the German army on the wonderful victory that God has given. People asked, Majesty, how do you actually view the victorious march of the German troops? So he wrote this telegram. Later, this would leave a dark mark over him, especially after the war. The fall of the Third Reich was not experienced further by the last Hohenzollern Kaiser. On June 4, 1941, Wilhelm II died in exile in the Netherlands. The last German Kaiser and King of Prussia left his descendants with a difficult legacy. Prussia has always been occupied with militarism, with compliance, but also naturally with art and culture and science. But the Kaiser's awareness of the war stands out to Germans today, and that means that people are on their guard when it comes to Prussia. Not always, but very often. Even during the lifetime of Prince Louis Ferdinand, the grandson of the last Kaiser and the grandfather of the current head of Prussia, George Frederick, advised the family in restraint when it came to their ancestors. I always have a hard time dealing with the historical role models from my ancestors, but I have to say that my grandfather was certainly a good role model. He also belonged to the political resistance, which in turn included the military resistance in the immediate Stauffenberg area. And I just think that the fact of how he organized the entire 20th century with all its ups and downs, whilst also dealing with the loss of his 2 children and wife, always going through it with his head held high, that is absolutely the image of a role model for me. The grandfather made his grandson their sole heir of the remaining assets and successor as the head of the house, because his 3 sons had entered into improper marriages. When Louis Ferdinand died in 1994, Prince George Friedrich took over his inheritance at the age of 18. It was a very big moment for me. I really felt it, and I'm sure he did too. That's why he asked at some point in the course of one of our meetings, "Let me ask you this serious question, George. Are you even aware of what could come your way?" The very serious look, which of course I will never forget. To represent the house, to administer the remaining estate, and to exercise the power to give instructions in family matters. Not an easy task for an 18-year-old. His uncles saw their chance.
These uncles all had to sign. So after having marriages that were not in keeping with their status, they had to sign saying they would renounce, so to speak. That's what they all did.
Nevertheless, they sued the young head of the family.
I actually find it all very sad. George is doing very well. And for him, it must be a big burden, these attacks from the evil uncles.
The ancestral legacy is still disputed today. However, no one can dispute Prince George Frederick's position as head of the family, even if he has no financial resources to fall back on to maintain the ancestral seat. Castle must be self-sufficient. The prince and princess visit Swabia regularly. Friedrich and Sophie earn their living working as management consultants. He in Rostock, she in Berlin.
It is really a challenge. It must be said that we both only work 4 days per week, so we have 1 day free and our employers are both flexible. And yet it's still difficult, because there are so many people to see, and Prince George takes his duties very, very seriously.
This generational leap for my family certainly didn't make it easy for many of those involved, including me. But I have to say that I couldn't have managed it all without a lot of support from friends, from people who helped me professionally, from people who gave me legal advice, for example, and especially from my own family. He appreciates support in particular from the Hohenzollerns family in Sigmaringen. I have a kind of role here where I take care of him, watch him and help him where he needs help. It's a true friendship. So we have a friendship that's like an uncle-nephew relationship. And my father liked him very much. They always had a very good relationship. We are a family, and that is the only way we can be strong. The evil uncles are not invited to Prince George Friedrich's and Princess Sophie's wedding. So, the family from Sigmaringen are all there. Friend and uncle Johann George is even a witness. The House of Hohenzollern. 2 families, 1 dynasty. It's an incredibly long-lasting tradition. 2 families who have made it through centuries with values and traditions to this day. That is actually something to hope for in the future. Someday the family and our spirit, which has survived so many centuries, won't just be remembered by our name. The House of Hohenzollern. They have left their mark on German history like no other dynasty.